Our News from the Hill segment tonight, just days after President Trump authorized Defense Secretary James Mattis to decide troop levels in Afghanistan, reports claimed Mattis planned to send an additional 4,000 troops to the country, perhaps as soon as next week. This morning, though, the Pentagon denied that report, saying the new plan, the new strategy in Afghanistan, will be presented to President Trump in the coming weeks, following Secretary Mattis's claim that we're losing in Afghanistan. Watch.
We're not winning in Afghanistan right now, and we will correct this as soon as possible. I believe the three things we are asking for stand on their own merit, however, as we look more broadly at the protection of the country.
When can we expect the Congress of the United States to get a strategy for Afghanistan that is a departure from the last 8 years, which is don't lose?
By mid-July, we'll be able to brief you in detail, sir. We're putting it together now, and there are actions being taken to make certain that we don't pay a price for the delay.
With me now from Free Range International, former Marine officer Tim Lynch. Tim, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Liz. I'm happy to be here.
All right, Tim, you heard Secretary Mattis. That's a pretty strong comment to make. He said, we are not winning in Afghanistan and we want to be winning. Do you concur with that assessment?
Absolutely. That's been my assessment since about 2008.
Right. And you, of course, served in Afghanistan for, if I'm not mistaken, upwards of 10 years, so you certainly know about this. What would be, if hypothetically we sent these additional troops, and the report whether 4,000 are going now or whether it's going to be a month from now or sometime this fall, that's still murky, it's still undetermined. But what role would those 4,000 extra troops play? Would they advise? Would they fight? Would they do counterterrorism missions? What would they do?
It's not big enough to fight, and it's not robust enough to do counterterrorism missions. What they would do is become permanent advisors to the different corps and brigades spread out through Afghanistan, which is what the Marines are doing in Helmand right now.
Right. So it would be a support mission then for the Afghan soldiers, I guess, fighting for their own country here. Now, talk to me for a second, Tim, about the fact that President Trump gave Secretary of Defense James Mattis, gave him the authority to make this decision. That's very differently than it was handled under the Obama administration, where the President Obama, made that determination himself.
Yes, it is very different. I think it's probably a very wise choice. There's very few men in America, or the world for that matter, as qualified as Secretary Mattis. I knew him slightly as during my Marine time. And it's not only a good departure from Obama, it's a good departure from the debacle of Vietnam, where you had LBJ on his hands and knees planning where he's going to bomb next in North Vietnam, which was ludicrous.
Right, right. And talk to me, I guess, about this strategy, too. Secretary Mattis said it would be mid-July before he can brief the Senate in depth here about his strategy. What do you foresee that looking like? What are we going to do to actually start winning again in Afghanistan?
I don't think there's anything that the military can do. The only coherent strategy I've heard articulated, and it's one that I wrote about repeatedly over the years, was, of all people, Eric Prince, who wrote that we need a viceroy. And we need to weed the Afghans off the 90% of their GDP, which comes from foreign aid. 90% of the money. They're sitting on $100 billion of natural resources, yet 90% of the government's funded by foreign aid. And we've got to get a strategy that goes after the resources that the Taliban are using. We've got to go after the lapis, the marble, the opium, the heroin, all that stuff. And without addressing, cutting off the Taliban's resources, they are not going to negotiate, which is part of Mattis's strategy. He's asking them to come to the table. They're winning. They're not going to come to the table. Why should they?
Right. Is that what Mattis meant then when he said that the United States is not going to repeat the past mistakes that we made, I suppose, in Afghanistan? I assume he's talking about President Obama pulling troops out prematurely and not leaving a stable situation, therefore creating a vacuum. But is that the sort of thing that he was talking about?
Yeah, I don't have any way of knowing what he's thinking about now. I know that he's on record as saying that the day that Obama announced the surge and then announced the end date was the day that we essentially lost. That was a very poor strategic move. But I also know we're not going to have enough to go in and duplicate what we did in 2009 and 2010, 2011. I mean, the Marine Corps locked Helmand Province down. It was locked down. But what a cost! It was permanently stationing 2 regimental combat teams. We don't have enough manpower to do that again.
Right. I suppose we don't. It'll be interesting to see. Tim, thanks so much for coming on the show, and thanks for your service to our nation, Marine. All right.